back to the crisis in the Middle East now, and the question that is on many minds. Is peace even possible, or have positions hardened to the point of no return? Another day, another suicide attack, yet another random group of Israeli citizens whose lives have been forever changed or lost. And on the same day, on the other side of the divide, in West Bank towns and cities, Palestinians are building reasons of their own to hate. This hardening of attitudes on both sides is not new or surprising, but what is worrisome is the kind of people who no longer see a way out. People like Rabbi David Foreman, founder of Rabbis for Human Rights, a group that monitors human rights abuses of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza.
I would say that I've experienced far more moral ambiguity than I have in the past. And clearly the increased terrorism, which targets civilians as a strategic form of of achieving political goals, has clearly upset a lot of my views.
For many Israelis, it's the unrelenting diet of death, chaos, and uncertainty. There are few whose lives have not been scarred. Foreman remembers exactly what it was that caused him to question his own views.
3 Palestinian terrorists were picked up coming out of the village of Tzor, which is just outside of Jerusalem, and they found maps on them, and one of the places that was marked for a suicide attack was my daughter's school.
And so, the question, how can peace be possible if more and more people living here are not only having difficulty reaching an understanding, but are no longer even looking for it?
As far as the Palestinian population, at least the Palestinians I've spoken to, there really is a hardening of position in the types of dialogues that we used to have, particularly with our colleagues in the religious field, both Muslims and Christians. We really can't establish them at all anymore. There's almost no common ground, sadly, for real conversations.
Conversations with Palestinians like Albert Agazarian. The recent incursions into the West Bank have left him unable to get to the university in Ramallah where he teaches. He used to trust that peace would come in time, but for him, time's up.
But you know, I used to say Israeli withdrawal. Now I believe that the magic word is complete Israeli withdrawal.
And here in Gaza, as in the West Bank, more and more Palestinians believe that the suicide attacks are a legitimate weapon. Not so long ago, only 20% supported that tactic. Now, polls indicate that 80% support the bombing campaign, something which worries Agazarian.
Today, I do not think you would find a Palestinian who would say after all these brutal incursions, they would not. I mean, it's extremely disappointing for people to start endorsing this type of activity.
Endorsing and increasingly participating in this kind of activity. Suicide bombings are no longer the exclusive domain of Hamas terrorists. Not when young teenage girls with fiancés, seemingly with their whole lives ahead of them, choose death.
And I have been constantly arguing, and I deeply believe that this is the factory which produces suicidal characters. It's desperation. It's not a different religion. It's not a different value system. It's simply desperation, and it is because I think that in any society, the wish to die is an aberration, but what we want to incarnate in our people is the desire to live. And if we do not have the desire to live, then we have enough people that they say, then we're going to die for a cause. And to create this as an icon, I think it's an aberration, but it's a problem we have to deal with, and the response for that will be to speed up the solution and to speed up the Palestinians to be able to have their place under the sun.
All of this makes it hard to see a way out. Hard to even contemplate a question like, is peace possible? But still, it has to be asked.
Very.
Gerald Steinberg is the director of Bar Ilan University's Conflict Resolution and Diplomacy Program. Jonathan Kuttab served as legal advisor to Palestinian negotiating teams. I spoke to them earlier this evening. Well, given all that's happened and given all that's continuing to happen, what about that question? Is peace still possible? Professor Steinberg?
I'm not sure that peace was really on the cards in the last 8 years. What we've seen is the tremendous effort that the Palestinian authorities put into accumulating weapons, explosives, training suicide bombers, incitement, everything we've seen in the last 18 months for sure has shown the Israeli public there wasn't really a serious effort made, certainly by Arafat, by many Palestinians, to reach some sort of agreement, modus vivendi, with the Israelis. We're really back to the beginning. Many Israelis talk about being back to 1947-48, where we're fighting for our existence, for our legitimacy. There's not really much of a common language that we have with Palestinians. This terrible cult of suicide bombings, of sending children in to die, all of that has really depressed a lot of Israelis. So peace in the way that it was talked about at the Oslo process in sort of glorious ways seems very, very far away. Perhaps the best we can do now is to talk seriously about stability and slowly beginning to make the foundation possible for a later effort at some sort of peace.
Mr. Kuttab, do you have that pessimistic a view as well?
Not at all. I think peace is very possible now. I think there is an international consensus now. The outlines of a peace are clear. Two states living side by side. The real obstacle, of course, is the Israeli settlements. They want peace, but they want to keep the land. They want peace, but they want to stay in control. They want a peace, but they want to dominate. I think now there is a greater awareness what the price of peace is going to be for both sides.
But where's that awareness? Is it here inside, or is it in the outside world? Where's the awareness?
I think the international community is clear now. The Palestinians are clear. We want a two-state solution. Some Israelis are courageous enough to say, yes, we know what it takes. The problem is that for 8 years, the Israelis have been lulled into a fake sense of a peace process, that they can continue to enjoy quiet and build and expand more settlements and take more land and keep the Palestinians oppressed with the mirage of peace in the future. Now that mirage has been removed, which is a good thing. For peace to come, we must have two states, and they must get rid of those settlements.
Professor Steinberg?
It's somewhat depressing to hear the same slogans repeated. The Israeli public overwhelmingly voted for a government that would have a two-state solution. First Prime Minister Rabin, later on Prime Minister Barak. Mr. Barak went to Camp David with a two-state solution, with more or less the 67 boundaries, with very painful Israeli recognition, acceptance of a return to a situation where we might not be allowed to go visit our holy sites in Jerusalem, as happened during the previous occupation from 48 to 67. The Israelis accepted that, and the Palestinians said, no, we want to destroy you. We're not interested in a two-state solution.
I think that...
But then you have to convince us if there's a change. What you're convincing us is that there's only violence in that society.
Not at all. What we were offered was something called a state while the settlement stayed in place. What Rabin did, and Barak, and Netanyahu, all of these were talking peace while they're building more settlements. How can you have a Palestinian state while you're taking more land and settling illegally Jews there in exclusive little ghettos that keep expanding? If you want peace, you have to be willing to allow us to enjoy 22% of Palestine, not all of Palestine, a small, less than a quarter of the land that was captured in 1967. This is the formula for peace.
Now, in the outside world, when we hear a debate like that, we sense that this can never be resolved here, that it is going to take outside help to resolve it. And therefore, in the past few days, the outside world is placing a lot of faith in Colin Powell in at least finding the beginning of the road towards peace. Is that realistic to be placing that much hope in what Colin Powell may do?
I don't think there's much that Mr. Powell can do at this stage. After so much terrorism and violence and such a strong Israeli reaction against our lives being sacrificed by this kind of violence, we need a long time to see that there is a partner on the other side, and it's not going to be Mr. Arafat. Mr. Arafat, as President Bush said, and it's always the Palestinian view, quotes half the sentence. The other half is, Mr. Arafat has missed his historic opportunity. We need a new Palestinian leadership, and I think at that stage we will also have a new Israeli leadership. Not Mr. Powell, not in a short period, but in a longer process, perhaps in a few months or a couple of years. The Israeli population wants separation. It wants an end to all of this interaction, including, of course, we'll have to take down a lot of the settlements. for that purpose. But we need on the Palestinian side fundamental changes which take longer than 3 days of an instant trip by the Secretary of State.
But let me just ensure that I'm getting it right, what you are saying. You are saying that these two leaders that exist now can't make peace together.
Well, I'm saying that Mr. Arafat can't make peace.
But you also seem to indicate that
we need
Mr.
a
Sharon
different
would.
generation of leaders who will respond to a fundamental Palestinian change.
Mr. Kuttab, I'll give you the last word on that point. Can these leaders make peace?
I think it is the people who make peace and not the leaders. Because these leaders, for better or worse, were chosen by their populations. I may be very disappointed in Sharon, but he is the leader that the Israeli people have chosen. You may not like Arafat, but he is the leader that the Palestinian people have chosen. What we need to do is address the real issues and not the personalities. And the real issues here are known. They are land. They are a place to live. They are a state, a place under the sun for the Palestinians. And yes, of course, security and peace for the Israelis. But they can't keep the land and keep the settlements and expand them and somehow expect us to sit and take it. We will not do so.
We're going to have to leave it at that. Jonathan Kuttab, Gerald Steinberg.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, as often happens on interviews like that, the two guests kept on talking once the cameras stopped rolling, something they said they hadn't had an opportunity to do for years. And as they kept talking, they found some common ground. In fact, when they left, they exchanged phone numbers and email addresses. When we come back to Canada and Brian Stewart with a story that brings all this a little closer to home.
I acknowledge that my side has done wrong. I want you to acknowledge that your side has done wrong. So I say stop looking for things, people to blame. Stop looking for causes and look for solutions. Look how we can live together.